we're talking about this ruling from uh, the scholars about this former coach in public school Prairie case. So we have two articles, one from NBC News by Pete Williams, published June 27th, 2022, and another one by On the Guardian by Moira Donegan, published a day after. Uh, so they talk about this case that probably everyone already heard about. It's this coach who is going to the middle of the pitch and takes all his guys and makes a prayer with them, and then he says that it's no, don't worry, it's just a personal prayer. The players, they don't have to be here. It's not mandatory. I listened to to parts of the talks that they had, and believe it or not, Kavanaugh was stupid. There's
You
no
don't
other
say.
word. There's
How,
no other word
how,
to put this,
how do you really feel, Sydney? I can't tell. How
because
do you really feel?
I don't remember who was arguing at this time, but they were talking about how coercion can work in school. Like, if you're not part of the prayer, then even though the coach says, yeah, it's not mandatory, if you're not there, then you probably won't make the team on the next game. And that's an inference. It's not a written rule. It's not said anywhere, but still the players know it, so they are kind of forced to be there. But Kavanaugh didn't agree with that, and that's why him and the others, the other five justices, decided that this was no issue.
Hmm.
So, what do you guys think about this?
I think when state sanctioned prayer in schools is only the second worst decision that your Supreme Court has made this week, that's pretty scary.
Well, I wanted to say that this is a story that we actually covered in the past about this Coach Kennedy that got fired from his from a coaching job in Alabama.
Wasn't
At
fired. He wasn't fired.
Oh, he was not fired.
He
He
was
was.
not fired.
Mm.
His contract expired and they
Oh,
chose
okay.
not to renew it.
Renew it.
So
Okay,
he
got it.
but
Gotcha.
that's the way that the right wing media likes to frame it, because it's part of
Yeah.
this persecution complex, right? They're like,
Yeah,
oh, he stood up for what he
Mhm.
believed in and he
but
was sheltered to the side.
but
Oh,
but
oh
to
no.
be God, this is so freaking silly. But to be honest, if he was taken, if he actually was fired, I would not have a problem with that because we
No,
talked about it in
no.
before. I know. That's what I said. I don't have a problem with that only because like we talked about this previously, and also it was even recognized by lower courts that he was given several chances by his school to say, "Hey." They didn't even tell him not to pray. They just said, "Can you just do it in a private area? You know, and just go to a private area." Matter of fact, if I can implore the no true Scotsman fallacy real quick, Matthew 6:5
Mm, I,
says,
I knew you were going there.
I'm going there. I'm going there. I wish I had an organ. I really did. But because I know. I said Matthew 6:5 says, and and when you pray, eh, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. That would be the King James Version, New King James Version. So this is the Bible, y'all. And if you are so much a Christian and you are adhering to the statutes of Christianity, this is your word. This is supposedly the word of God. Okay? So why are you taking a knee at the 50-yard line, Coach Kennedy?
Because if you do it inside, then God can see you. He can only see you if you do it on the yard.
I
That,
see.
that's
I
basic
see.
logic.
You're right, Cindy. You're right. God can't see you privately. He only is omniscient, omnipotent, and also ever present. But he cannot see you in private. You right.
Yes, he doesn't have X-ray eyes to see through the walls.
Yeah,
Ah.
that's Superman.
Yeah, he's not Superman. Come on.
I ain't gonna
Yeah,
say
Kelley,
that.
be reasonable here.
Oh my gosh. But this is going back again, y'all, to this whole thing about the establishment clause just like being just thrown out the window by the SCOTUS. Like, first we have Boobert Bobbert saying, I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk. And then we basically have the SCOTUS agreeing with her. Kavanaugh was like, you know what, Boebert? Yeah, I'm tired of it too. He was exercising his right to freedom of religion. You can freedom religion yourself in private, Kennedy. You did not have to do, and then inviting your students to come with you. That's not coercion. I don't know, y'all. Help me out, Kelley. What was you gonna say?
That's
Um,
okay. So
Go ahead,
I
Nate.
have a.
yeah, go
I'll
ahead, Nick. Yeah,
quickly
go
jump
ahead.
in because I want to hear what especially what the two Americans on this panel have to say about this. But I have a bit of a hot take because I actually think he should be allowed to pray. And
Mm.
I think he should be allowed to pray right in the middle of the field if he wants to. Sure. I can't really imagine that crowds of people are hanging around after high school football games to watch this man go out and try to look fancy in front of the crowd. But what he shouldn't be able to do is the altar call, like Cynthia was saying. You shouldn't be able to invite your students out to pray with you, because that gets into sort of what Cindy was saying with the position of power, and maybe if you don't go out and pray, then you get benched or you get mistreated, and especially with a vulnerable group like
Mhm.
teenagers,
Yeah.
especially like teenage boys that play football, like they're part of that team mentality. They want to fit in. They will fit in. Whether they agree or not, they're probably going to feel coerced into joining their coach on the field. So I would be okay if he wanted to go out and pray to his invisible friend in the middle of an empty football field. I think he'd look pretty freaking silly out there all by himself kneeling down. And the other thing about this guy is that if you actually look up, I didn't do this myself, but I heard this on another podcast that I listened to. But they looked up the actual team's performance, and they're like last. They're like almost dead last in whatever division they're in. So
Mm.
whatever he's doing is just an illustration of the fact that petitionary prayer just kind of really doesn't work, and he's just wasting his time. But
Mm.
what do you guys think? Should he be allowed to walk out into the middle of the field and kneel down and pray to his sky wizard?
Kelley, I'm going to let you,
I
say your piece on that, and then I'll go in.
I I agree with Nate. I don't think it's a problem if he goes out and prays, but I want the Satanic Temple to be able to do a ritual out there. I want to see a Hindu ritual from the Hindu family that's at the school. If we're going to do it, let's do it for all the religions, right? And Nate, you were talking about the reason they weren't winning is because he was praying after the game. You see, that was one of the problems, and he kind of became a local celebrity because of this. So he wasn't
Oh.
out there alone. There was one point where the spectators in the stands actually hopped over the fence onto the field and knocked over band members, some of the school band members, to get out to his prayer circle. So it became a lot
Hmm.
larger than just one guy on the 50-yard line praying, right? And what I really worry about with something like this and Cindy brought it up, is now here's the kid who's really good, and he's going to be benched for the season because he's not joining in on the prayer circles, right? It's
Right.
it's really troubling, and I'm really worried because we now have 5, possibly 6 with Gorsuch. Gorsuch, Gorsuch. How about that?
Gorsuch. Gorsuch.
5, possibly 6 conservative. So we possibly have 6 conservative Catholics on the bench right now. I mean, we have actually a majority of conservative Catholics, and that's troubling in and of itself. And it should be troubling for Protestants as well, and I would hope that they would start to think about what they really want, because it might not work out the way they want it to go. I'm also really worried because there is a group called America Legal First. It's manned by several ex-Trump staffers, including the guy that asked Stacca. He helped adopt the parent-child separation policy on the southern border. And they've gotten the idea that they can get SCOTUS to agree that individual states can institute their own state religions. And I'm not sure that can happen, but I think they might have some legal ground to work with. And because, as you mentioned earlier, Cindy, the Establishment Clause says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. But the 10th Amendment reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively.
That's right.
So if Congress can't make that law, it seems to me that the 10th Amendment would let the states do it. And that's something I really worried about. And can you imagine a state religion in some places down south? Well, can you tell me how to get to the First Baptist Church? Well, yeah, you go down the road of Peasty to come to the Fourth Baptist Church, and then go about a mile farther and you'll see the Third Baptist Church. And then you go down about 2 more miles to the Second Baptist Church, make a left and go down a mile, and you'll see the First Baptist Church right there. And God bless you, sir.
Take a ride at the Piggly Wiggly, and you're going to find yourself there real shortly.
That's mid-real. Well, that's the loophole, right? That's the loophole, Kelley, that you were mentioning about the 10th Amendment. And that's even like the precedent that SCOTUS actually established, specifically rolling back Roe v. Wade. Now the power to regulate or completely ban abortions is in the state's hands, period. And so since that's the case, they can do whatever they want, because people do not have the federal protection any longer. So it could be a loophole. I definitely was even listening to some podcasts specifically on NPR where they were actually talking about that, where, some of these decisions specifically by the SCOTUS, if they are taking their hands off of it as far as interpreting as this is a federal protection, and then regulated to know this is states' rights, that could actually be for just about anything that you can think of, where either the Fed step in by a court case, or if it was done through legislation. So saying well, we can technically say that this particular portion of the law does not cover this kind of thing. So it could be states' rights right here,
So what's the point of the United States in the end?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think the last time
we still vote for one
last time
president
y'all
that's
had
a figurehead.
Yes, there you go. Kelley said what
last
Kelley
time
said.
y'all had a big states' rights issue. It didn't work out so good.
Yeah, last time we had a states' rights issues, my ancestors was enslaved. Just saying. But back to one of the questions that you asked specifically about what we thought about the whole. Are you okay if he went down to the 50-yard line and prayed in public? And I am in agreement with Justice Sotomayor's dissension when she said, to the degree the court portrays petitioner Joseph Kennedy's prayers as private and quiet, it misconstrues the facts. The record reveals that Kennedy had a long-standing practice of conducting demonstrative prayers on the 50-yard line of the football field. Kennedy consistently invited others to join his prayers, and for years led student athletes in prayers at the same time and location. The court ignores this history. The court also ignores the severe disruption to school events caused by Kennedy's conduct. So it wasn't a private prayer. It would have been something if it was just him. He goes down to the 50-yard line, he bows his head, he says a little prayer in his head, and then goes on about his business, or even says, hey, students, I'm about to go ahead and just do a silent prayer. anybody want to join me? You good. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And if they were even standing there, bowing their heads, saying things to themselves, and then moving along, it would have been a whole different story. But this is not what happened. This is exactly what it did not happen. So if he was being demonstrative in his prayers, that means he was saying things out loud, and people very much so knew what he was doing. So this wasn't something that he kept to himself. And because of that, I absolutely agree with Justice Sotomayor when she said that this is something that the court has ignored. And this is exactly against what the founding fathers wanted when they even crafted the Establishment Clause in the first place. So before we move along, let's just go ahead and just give some final thoughts. Nate, I'm going to start with you, and then Kelley, and then Cindy, then we'll go into our next segment.
I don't have any problem if you want to talk to your invisible friend, but you have no right to tell my kid to talk to your invisible friend. I think this high school needs a couple more Colin Kaepernicks on the team. Just saying.
Indeed. Kelley?
I am really worried about them trying to make a state religion to break down that wall of the Establishment Clause. And I think that Catholic conservative majority that I just mentioned might be work in our favor, because Protestants actually outnumber Catholics by 2-1 in the United States, and the Catholic judges are not, or Protestants outnumber Catholics by 2-1. Is that what I just said? Sometimes both my brain cells get stuck together. And the Catholic judges are not likely to pass something that might hurt members of their own religion, right? And Protestant Catholic wars, I think I heard of that type of thing before. Oh yeah, Church of England. That's exactly why the Establishment Clause was put there in the first place.
England. And Cindy?
Yeah, I think from the outside, the impression I have is that the Scottish just needs to go. The U.S. needs to get rid of this worship of the Constitution and the Founding Fathers. This great experiment, as this Constitution is called, it has failed right now. It's in the time it existed, this Constitution, France went through 5 republics with a different constitution each time. No matter how good the people who wrote the American Constitution were, they were just men. They were fallible men. And so it needs to be adjusted as society changes. You cannot just reinterpret it. It has to be rewritten. You cannot keep laws relevant for 3 centuries. No country has. So Scottish needs to go. The Constitution needs to be rewritten. I don't see any way around this.
Well, what I will say specifically about the Constitution is that it was meant to be a living document. That's why we have amendments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's exactly why we have amendments. So that if we had archaic laws like the Second Amendment, fight me if you want, then we can go ahead and amend that in order for it to actually reflect the times that we're in. Like I will say it again. There is no reason for us to have a well-regulated militia. It's called the National Guard, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force. Okay. That is our well-regulated militia. No citizen needs AR-15s. No citizen needs high-capacity weapons of war. They just don't. And in same in this particular case as well, there are principles that the founding fathers, not slavery, but there are some principles that the founding fathers actually came up with that make sense, and the Establishment Clause is one of them, because it was already precedent that was set, like in England, where they actually broke away from where the church and the monarchy were one. Okay, and we know that even like freedom of religion, freedom to actually express yourself in whatever type of belief system that you wanted to practice at that time. If you were in England, or if you were a Commonwealth of England, that was just not the case. So there are some good ideas that actually exist that's within the United States Constitution. It's just that we just have really bad actors right now that are interpreting them. And with that
I'm not.
be, go ahead.
Just one last thing. I'm not sure I
Yes.
entirely agree with that last part. If the Constitution was so great, the United States wouldn't be in that situation right now. It's because there are so many flaws in the way it's written that people can interpret the way they want and do whatever they want. And I'm not saying there were bad people or the Constitution what was bad at the time. I think it was a pretty good Constitution at the time, but the writing was not precise enough to prevent any loophole as many as we have today.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I definitely believe that, there are way too many loopholes in the document, and I think that that's the reason why the founding fathers wanted to have an amendment so that
I would love to chime in here, but I feel like we're going to be borrowing heavily from my fourth segment if I do. So, I'm just gonna bite my tongue, and I'm not gonna say the Thomas Jefferson quote. Don't do it, Nady. Don't do it. Oh, don't do it, Nady. I'll hold off. I'll hold off. But I think we were just about wrapped up with that particular segment.